The Copa Room at the Sands Hotel was packed on the night of February 12, 1962. Every seat filled and every table reserved weeks in advance, all eyes fixed on the stage, where Dean Martin stood beneath a single spotlight halfway through That's Amore. It was a performance he had delivered 1,000 times, smooth and effortless, the audience completely under his spell, as he reigned at the peak of his powers, the untouchable king of Las Vegas. Then, Sam Giancana walked in. He didn't enter quietly, he never did. Surrounded by an entourage of 8 men in inexpensive suits, all radiating an unspoken menace, he caused people to instinctively move aside. A nervous maitre d' rushed over, attempting to find seats despite the show already being underway and the room at full capacity, but Sam waved him off and took a front table, forcing the original guests to move without protest. No one ever complained when Sam Giancana wanted something. Dean saw him. Everyone on stage saw him, and Frank Sinatra, watching from a side table, visibly tensed. Giancana, the volatile boss of the Chicago outfit, was known for being generous when pleased and deadly when angry, and tonight he looked angry. Dean kept singing. With 2,800 people watching, he had no other choice. He finished the final note of That's Amore to roaring applause, bowed, smiled, and prepared to begin the next song, until Sam Giancana stood up. His voice sliced through the applause, silencing the room as he called out to Dean. Dean's smile froze as Sam loudly declared the performance terrible, mocking him for sounding like a dying cat and questioning what had happened to the singer he once admired. The silence was absolute, shocking everyone in the room, because nobody insulted Dean Martin, certainly not in his own show, in front of a live audience. Dean stood motionless, microphone in hand, trying to process the moment, wondering if it was some cruel joke, but Sam's face showed no humor at all, only cold, calculated cruelty. "I'm serious," Sam continued, savoring the attention. "I paid good money to see Dean Martin, and instead I get this." He waved dismissively. "Frank, you should get up there. Show him how it's really done." Frank Sinatra went pale and started to rise, perhaps trying to diffuse the situation, but Sam cut him off. "Sit down, Francis. I'm talking to your boy here." Turning back to Dean, he sneered. "You know what your problem is, Dean? You think you're special. You think that because you've got a pretty voice and a nice suit, you're somebody, but you're not. You're nobody. You're just another singer who works for me." The humiliation was precise, surgical. Sam wasn't drunk or out of control. He was deliberately, methodically dismantling Dean Martin in front of everyone who mattered in Las Vegas: studio executives, fellow entertainers, journalists. Dean Martin, the cool king of Vegas, was just another employee who could be put in his place whenever Sam Giancana wished. Yet Dean's face remained neutral, the Martin mask hiding his true feelings. He could have walked off stage, cracked a joke, or tried to smooth things over. All options meant backing down, accepting humiliation, letting Sam win. Instead, Dean made a different choice. He stepped to the edge of the stage in front of Sam's table. The spotlight followed him, every eye in the room locked on him. Calmly, he spoke so everyone could hear. "Sam, you're right about one thing. I do think I'm special. You want to know why? Because I'm standing on this stage because of talent, because people pay to hear me sing, because I worked my whole life to get here." He paused. "You're sitting in that audience because your father was a criminal and you followed in his footsteps. You got your power by hurting people, by threatening people, by making people afraid." The atmosphere shifted. This wasn't just refusal to back down. This was counterattack. Sam's face darkened, and his men began to rise, but he held up a hand, curious to hear more. Dean continued, "You come into my show, interrupt my performance, insult me in front of my audience, and you think I'm just going to take it, smile, apologize, beg for your approval? That's not going to happen, Sam. Not tonight. Not ever." Sam's voice was quiet but menacing. "You're making a big mistake, Dean." Dean shook his head. "Maybe, but at least I'm making it on my feet, not on my knees." He turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but I want you to understand something. I've been performing in Las Vegas for 10 years, and for 10 years I've played by the rules, the mob's rules. I've been respectful. I've been careful. I've kept my mouth shut about things I've seen and heard, because that's how you survive in this town." Frank Sinatra was now on his feet, panic written across his face, while the other Rat Pack members stood frozen, unsure how to react, and the audience watched in rapt silence, barely breathing. Dean broke it by saying he was done pretending this was acceptable, done acting as if it were normal for gangsters to own the city and everyone in it, and done being afraid. Locking eyes with Sam, he said that Sam could threaten him, try to destroy his career, or even kill him, but he would never make him bow again. Sam Giancana rose slowly and coldly declared that Dean had just ended his career in Las Vegas and would never work in the town again. Dean replied simply that he would work somewhere else, Los Angeles, New York, London, anywhere but under Sam's control. He placed the microphone on the stage, the sound echoing through the stunned room, and addressed the audience, thanking them for coming and apologizing for ending the show early, explaining that he refused to perform where he was treated like property. Then he walked off the stage, abandoning his show, his contract, and everything he had built in Las Vegas. The audience remained silent as Sam looked shocked, and Frank hurried backstage after Dean, demanding to know what he had just done. Dean admitted, his hands shaking as the adrenaline faded, that he knew exactly what he had done, possibly ending his career and risking far worse, but he couldn't allow himself to be humiliated and pretend it was fine, because that wasn't the kind of man he wanted to be. Frank warned him desperately that Sam Giancana didn't make threats, he made promises, and that humiliating him publicly was dangerous. But Dean quietly replied that he would rather die standing than live on his knees. Within an hour, the story spread across Las Vegas. Dean Martin had publicly defied Sam Giancana, called out the mob, and walked off his own show. Reactions were split. Some saw him as brave, a man who finally said what everyone else feared to, while others thought he was reckless and doomed, certain that crossing Giancana meant the end of both career and life, and that anyone close to Dean was now at risk. The Sands Hotel responded immediately, suspending Dean's contract pending review. Other Vegas hotels quietly made it known that Dean Martin was no longer welcome. The blacklist was immediate and total, just as Sam Giancana had promised. But something unexpected happened. The story went national, and the coverage framed it not as Dean Martin insults mob boss, but as Dean Martin stands up to mob intimidation. Public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. People were tired of organized crime controlling Las Vegas, tired of the endless news of violence and corruption, and here was one of America's biggest stars saying no more. 3 days after the incident, Dean received a call from Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General of the United States, who had been waging a war against organized crime. Kennedy told Dean, "What you did took enormous courage. The federal government is prepared to protect you, and more than that, we want to work with you to change how Las Vegas operates." When Dean asked what he meant, Kennedy explained that they would use Dean's stand as a catalyst for reform, pushing for new regulations, federal oversight of casinos, and protections for entertainers to break the mob's grip on the city, with Dean helping lead the effort. Over the next 6 months, Dean Martin became the face of a movement he had never intended to start. He testified before Congress about mob influence in the entertainment industry, not giving names or snitching, but describing the climate of fear and intimidation. He spoke to journalists about the constant anxiety performers faced, always watching their words and actions for signs of angering the wrong people. Inspired by Dean, other entertainers came forward. Sammy Davis Jr. revealed being forced to perform at private mob parties without pay, while lesser-known performers shared stories of threats, extortion, and violence, collectively painting a picture of an industry entirely controlled by organized crime. The federal government responded with the Gaming Control Act of 1962, significantly increasing oversight of Las Vegas casinos. While mob influence did not disappear overnight, it would take decades. The law marked the beginning of the end. The FBI increased its presence, background checks for casino employees became mandatory, and the corporate Vegas era slowly took hold as legitimate companies began replacing mob ownership. Most importantly, entertainers gained unprecedented protections. Screen Actors Guild contracts, strengthened by public opinion and Dean's testimony, now included clauses safeguarding performers from interference during shows, established grievance procedures, and created security protocols. For the first time, entertainers could work in Vegas without constant fear of mob intimidation. Sam Giancana never forgave Dean Martin. For the rest of his life, until his murder in 1975, he refused to be in the same room as Dean. He tried to have Dean blacklisted, but public support was too strong. He attempted to intimidate Dean through intermediaries, but FBI protection made that nearly impossible. In the end, all Sam could do was watch as the empire he had helped build slowly crumbled, with Dean Martin's defiance as one of the first cracks in its foundation. Dean never returned to the Sands. He couldn't, not while it remained under mob control. But he continued performing in Los Angeles, New York, and on television. His career did not end, it evolved. Dean was no longer just a singer or a comedian. He became someone who stood for something, someone willing to risk everything for principle. Years later, in 1972, a young comedian named George Carlin met Dean at a party in Los Angeles. Carlin, who had grown up understanding mob mentality, asked if Dean had ever regretted what he had done that night at the Sands. Dean paused for a long moment before replying, "You know what I regret? I regret all the times I didn't do it, all the times I saw something wrong and stayed quiet, all the times I played it safe." He took a sip of his drink. That night in 1962, that was the first time in my life I felt truly free, because I realized fear only has power over you if you let it, and I decided not to let it anymore. Carlin asked quietly, "Even though it could have gotten you killed?" "Especially because it could have gotten me killed," Dean replied. "Because once you're willing to risk everything, once you decide that some things are worth dying for, you're finally free. Nobody can control you anymore. Nobody can threaten you because you've already accepted the worst that could happen." The story of February 12, 1962 became legend in Hollywood. The night Dean Martin stood up to Sam Giancana and changed the rules. But its significance went beyond that single moment of courage. It inspired others. Industries began questioning mob influence. Labor unions pushed back against infiltration, and politicians found the courage to prosecute organized crime more aggressively, all because one entertainer refused to accept public humiliation, no matter who was delivering it. Frank Sinatra, who had been terrified that night, later said watching Dean walk off that stage was the bravest thing he had ever witnessed. "We all thought we had to play by their rules," Frank said in a 1990 interview. "We thought that was just the cost of working in Vegas, but Dean showed us we didn't. He showed us we had power too. The power to say no, the power to walk away, the power to demand respect." When Dean Martin died in 1995, obituaries mentioned the Rat Pack, his music, and his movies, but younger entertainers remembered him for something else, for standing up to the mob when everyone else was too scared, for changing an industry that seemed unchangeable, and for proving that talent and integrity were more powerful than threats and intimidation. Modern Las Vegas, the corporate, regulated, and relatively clean city, exists in part because of what Dean did that night. The performer protections, the contracts guaranteeing autonomy and security, all came because Dean risked everything to demand them. Sam Giancana tried to humiliate Dean, to show that entertainers were property, that talent meant nothing, and that fear always won. But Dean's response, walking off the stage, speaking truth to power, refusing to be intimidated, proved Sam wrong. In the end, Sam Giancana died in his basement, shot by unknown assassins, his empire crumbling around him. Dean Martin, by contrast, died peacefully in his bed on Christmas Day, surrounded by the love and respect of an entire industry he had helped liberate. That wasn't just a victory, that was a revolution. A quiet revolution began with a man who refused to be humiliated, who chose dignity over safety, who understood that some things are worth risking everything for. On February 12, 1962, Sam Giancana walked into the Copa room thinking he would remind Dean Martin who was really in charge. Instead, he sparked a moment that would ultimately break the mob's stranglehold on Las Vegas and Hollywood. He tried to make Dean look small. Dean stood up, literally and figuratively, and became a giant. That is the real story of that night. Not the humiliation, but the response. Not the fear, but the courage. Not the end of something, but the beginning. The beginning of a new era where entertainers weren't property, where talent mattered more than intimidation, where saying no to power was possible. Dean Martin changed Hollywood that night, not by being the loudest, the toughest, or the most famous, but by being the first to walk away, by showing everyone that freedom is worth more than any paycheck, any career, any amount of success. That moment of courage became his greatest legacy, greater than any song he ever sang or movie he ever made, the legacy of a man who refused to bow, even when bowing seemed like the only way to survive. Sometimes, the coolest thing you can do is stand up.